Hello everyone. Well, inevitably we're going to be talking about the results of yesterday's French presidential elections. In the first round, the two leading candidates are now Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, who were the two favourites to get to the next round. And just to remind you, the next round is on the 7th of May and it's a head-to-head between these two candidates. So whoever wins that will become President of France. Very, very interesting election this, because neither of them belong to either of the two main political parties. However, I would say that Emmanuel Macron is the establishment candidate and Marine Le Pen is the populist candidate. There's lots of text that we're going to go through in the next 20 minutes or so that I can elaborate on that, but that's my view and has been throughout the election. So let's look at the results. I think this is with 97% of the votes counted. A very good turnout for the elections. 78.6% of French people voted, with abstention only at 21.4%. And you can see how close it was and how many candidates there were. With so many candidates, it was obvious beforehand that neither Macron nor Le Pen would reach the required 50%. So Macron got 23.5%, Marine Le Pen 22.3%, very close. The French Conservative, François Fillon, from the mainstream Republicans Party, 19.9%, and the far left candidate from France Insoumise, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, got 19%. And the other two candidates to take into account are Benoît Hamon from the French Socialists, who were the governing party, only 6.2%, and Nicolas Dupont-Aignan, whose party I can't remember, but he's a Gaullist and pretty conventional. What's interesting are the poll predictions for the second round. Here it says a lightning Ipsos poll of second round voting intentions sees Macron beating Le Pen by 62% to 38%. So pretty much the whole establishment are banking on Macron, who's quite an unknown quantity, becoming French president. Now, if we go back to these results, you see that Macron got 25.5%. I think he's guaranteed virtually all of Hamon's and Dupont-Aignan's votes. Basically, Hamon was a socialist and Macron is a former socialist economics minister. I think he's been invented by the Socialist Party. He really is the socialist candidate. They've realised the rise of populism, so they've created a kind of fake populist. So he'll get those 6.2%. He'll also get Dupont-Aignan's votes because Dupont-Aignan is a Gaullist and very pro-EU, centrist and quite conventional. Going to the next round, Macron is almost certainly guaranteed 34-35% of the vote. So Marine Le Pen really is facing a difficult task if she wants to become president, because in reality, the difference between the two candidates is quite strong. I think amongst Fillon and Mélenchon's voters, there'll be quite a few who'll vote for Le Pen. The question is it enough? Let's read what The Guardian had to say when the first results had come in. Emmanuel Macron has beaten the far-right leader Marine Le Pen in the first round of the French presidential election with a projected total of 23.7% to Le Pen's 21.9%. The two candidates, the first pro-European and internationalist and the other anti-EU and protectionist, will now face off in a second round runoff on the 7th of May. Polls have consistently forecast Macron will beat Le Pen and become France's next president. The scandal-hit Conservative candidate François Fillon and the Socialist candidate Benoît Hamon both conceded defeat and called on their supporters to back Macron. The first round result is an epochal political upheaval for France. For the first time in the nearly 60-year history of the Fifth Republic, neither of the candidates of the established parties of left and right will be in the runoff. Speaking in her home constituency of Hénin-Beaumont, Le Pen said the French people now faced a very simple choice. Either we continue on the path to complete deregulation, or you choose France. You now have the chance to choose real change. This is what I propose, real change. It is time to liberate the French nation from arrogant elites who want to dictate how it must behave. Because yes, I am the candidate of the people. Macron said in the space of a year, since founding his En Marche movement, it had changed the face of French politics and asked for a big victory for a large governing majority. I want to construct a majority to govern and to transform, of new talents in which all will have their place. I will not ask where they come from, but whether they agree with the renewal of our politics, the security of the French people, reforming society and relaunching the European project. You are the face of this renewal. My fellow citizens, there is not more than one France. There is only one, ours, the France of the patriots, in a Europe that protects and that we must reform. The task is immense, but I am ready at your sides. Vive la République, vive la France. So there's lots of stuff here. They're describing Macron as pro-European and internationalist, and Marine Le Pen as anti-EU and protectionist. Basically, this means that Macron is pro-EU and has no problem with massive integration, and Marine Le Pen is Eurosceptic and wants to close the borders. On an economic level, this idea of internationalist and protectionist is complete bunkum. Marine Le Pen will call for an EU referendum. I think it's very unlikely that France will come out, partly because they're in the euro, but you'll have a Eurosceptic in government. France will not change as radically under Marine Le Pen as Britain post-Brexit or as Donald Trump promised. And I think we're seeing now with Trump how difficult it is to bring about real change. The interesting thing here is François Fillon, who's pro-EU but anti-immigration, has called on his supporters to back Macron. It was obvious that Benoît Hamon would do the same. I'm not sure what Jean-Luc Mélenchon of the far-left France Insoumise has decided. I would imagine that quite a lot of his voters would be attracted more to Macron than Le Pen. But that remains to be seen. There's 2 weeks to go and a lot can change in politics. As it says here, this is a political upheaval for France because neither of the two main parties have got a candidate through to the next round. So whatever happens, the next French president will technically be an outsider. I think you know that I'm a Le Pen supporter. I'm anti-EU. I can't see much chance of reform and I think it's going to fall apart over the next decade unless someone like Marine Le Pen can get in and provoke real reform. I'm also very much against the open border policies, and I'm not going to show it now, but the level of violence and lack of civic behaviour provoked by migrants in France is extraordinary. And there have been continual terrorist attacks, 36 I think since 2013, 238 people have died. That's not the only thing, because the terrorist a couple of days ago actually was French born. So the large immigrant community are actually changing the way France is. This is very much Marine Le Pen's argument. We don't like it because it's not French. In a lot of my videos, I talk about national identity and national culture. And this is what she said about the burkini. I want to ban the burkini because French people don't wear these kind of things and French people don't behave in this way. It's not French. Whereas Macron is internationalist in the globalist sense and makes no distinction between good or bad cultures. Everybody's welcome, everybody's French. You've been here 5 minutes and you're just as French as someone whose family has lived in France for the last 1,000 years. I personally think this is a ridiculous idea. So let's go a little bit further in and see how the two candidates announced that they would be going through to the next round.
Je souhaite, dans 15 jours, devenir votre président. Le président de tout le peuple de France, le président des patriotes face à la menace des nationalistes.
So as you can see, he wants to be president of all French people, and what he means is of all colours and even if you've only been here for 5 minutes. And this is one of the big arguments in politics in general. What is Americanness? What is Britishness? What is Frenchness? Does it mean allowing everybody to come into your country because we are good and tolerant and open? The problem then is, particularly if you invite people who are not good and tolerant and open into your country, is your country will end up not being good and tolerant and open. And this is the argument that Marine Le Pen is putting forward. Let's see what she has to say.
Je lance un appel à tous les patriotes sincères, d'où qu'ils viennent, quelles que soient leurs origines, quel qu'ait été leur parcours et leur vote au premier tour, à me rejoindre. Je les appelle à sortir des querelles périmées, des a priori et des ressentiments parce qu'il y va de l'intérêt supérieur du pays.
See, once again, the word patriot, patriot. This is going to be the central word over the next 2 weeks. What kind of France do we want? We all love France. Do we want a France with open borders that loses its identity? Or do we want a France that is French? And I don't think it's fair to say, actually, that Marine Le Pen is a racist. I think she's a civic nationalist, but insists that whatever the colour of your skin, France has a certain set of values. It is a secular democracy. And she's anti-Muslim, not because of the colour of the people or where they come from, but because of the values of Islam. That was from the BBC. Let's go back to The Guardian and watch this clip. So people are selling Macron as a new populist, but actually he is a pro-EU ex-banker and economy minister. The interesting thing about En Marche is it's not a party, it's a movement. Now, if it was real populism, this might be a good thing, because there would be no incumbent infrastructure, and the actual makeup of the government is an unknown quantity. It's an invention of the French Socialist Party. So what I think will happen is, if Macron becomes president, there'll be absolutely no change, and basically you'll have a new socialist government with a different name and a different leader. Marine Le Pen, on the other hand, is more of an authentic populist. Here she's described as the leader of the anti-immigration and anti-EU National Front. But you have to remember that in the current French Assembly, the National Front have only got 2 deputies. So in reality, she's much more of an outsider than Macron is.
Il a décidé de me porter en tête du premier tour de ce scrutin.
La première étape qui doit conduire les Français à l'Élysée est franchie. Ce résultat est historique. Il fait reposer sur moi désormais la responsabilité immense de la défense de la nation française, de son unité, de sa sécurité, de sa culture, de sa prospérité et de son indépendance.
I can't remember exactly what she says here, but you get her message. It's a very, very clear pro-French message, the security, culture and independence of France. I think that's very important, particularly compared with the very wishy-washy message of Macron, which is patriotism, love everybody, we have to put up with terrorism because we have to be tolerant. That's not going to be Marine Le Pen's attitude. Marine Le Pen has policies. As we're discussing the possibility of Le Pen getting through to the next round, I have to admit it's difficult. But pretty much you can see here on the map, Le Pen is in purple and Macron is in khaki. And in many respects, if you want to compare this with Brexit or Donald Trump, all the areas where Le Pen is popular are similar to the rundown post-industrial British North or the Rust Belt in America. These are places where the working class really have been sold out, where there's been a lack of investment, the EU has been shown to fail, and there are large Muslim communities who don't really integrate with the rest of society. Compare this with the much more prosperous and middle-class areas that have voted for Macron. Now, if you look through the news, everything is pro-Macron, and they're really trying to paint him as a rebel. This is an old Guardian article. Here it says, Emmanuel Macron, the French outsider who would be president. An outsider, a former Rothschild banker and an ex-minister. He's not an outsider. He's a laboratory creation of the Socialist Party. After once likening his rebellious streak to France's 15th century saint and saviour, Joan of Arc, Macron's premise is to sidestep the old party machines and build a direct relationship with the French people. He believes that ever since King Louis XVI's head was chopped off in the Revolution, France has been trying to compensate for the lack of a true leader figure who could personify France. The post-war president General de Gaulle fitted the bill, he has argued, but since then, the increasingly ordinary characters who served as president have left a kind of empty seat at the heart of political life. So you see, he's comparing himself to Louis XVI and General de Gaulle. But look at him. He's as bland as they get. Good-looking, charming, middle-class, I admit, but hardly a revolutionary. Now, this French election is very important, and more than any other, I think, the international news has focused on it, basically because there's a sea change in international politics. And these two candidates, in many ways, just like Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, embody two different worldviews. I have to admit that Macron is a lot more attractive and dynamic than Hillary Clinton, but basically he represents globalism. That's open borders and belonging to large supranational organisations. In this case, it's the EU. In the case of Hillary Clinton, it was NAFTA and TPP. Now, Marine Le Pen is very Trump-like in her outlook. She's more cultured, more diplomatic, but basically the message is similar. France for the French, let's keep our culture our way, close the borders, and have limited membership of large international organisations like the EU. So here's what the international media have said. Media in several countries pointed to the historic defeat suffered by the mainstream left and right, with the Wall Street Journal calling the vote a stunning rebuke of France's mainstream political forces. In an article headlined "France Torn Apart," Germany's Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung noted that more than 40% had cast their ballots for the far right or far left. Macron's victory is so narrow that in the two previous presidential elections, he wouldn't have won a place in the second round, it said, warning against assumptions the centrist would win in May. Switzerland's Le Temps said the results signalled that the French Republic was broken and that voters wanted deep changes. I'd argue that, but let's look a little bit deeper at the assumption that the centrist, Macron, the establishment candidate, will definitely win on the 7th of May. You see, it all depends on where he can poach the votes from. Now, this graphic is very clear. I know the other candidates have recommended that their voters vote for Macron, but let's assume that the voting public does have a mind of its own, and how the issues are debated over the next 2 weeks will finally decide who becomes next French president. So this graphic is very clear. Marine Le Pen stands for national identity, i.e. a reduction of immigration, and a nationalised economy, so she's Eurosceptic. Whereas Emmanuel Macron stands for a cosmopolitan identity, that means open borders, and a globalised economy, that means he's pro-EU. And you see that on each of these issues, François Fillon and Jean-Luc Mélenchon share one characteristic with each of the two presidential frontrunners. The question basically is, will the anti-immigration stance of Fillon's voters be important enough to make them vote for Marine Le Pen? And will the Euroscepticism of Mélenchon's voters be enough for them to do the same? To be perfectly honest, I have no idea, but it all depends on how she presents her case over the next 2 weeks. And remember, she's a former lawyer. Until 2011, she's a working lawyer, so she's actually very good at presenting her case. I suggest what she should do is ramp up the anti-immigration argument and be a little bit more realistic about her Euroscepticism. As I said before, she wants to call for a referendum on the EU. I think even if she does, the French won't vote to come out, because the fact that they're in the euro makes it much more difficult for them. So I think Marine Le Pen's argument on the EU should be broadly anti-German, which will make her popular, be against German hegemony, and also push for strong reforms, like stopping Schengen and decreasing the amount of regulation. That seems to me the best way to poach the left-wing voters. But before we go out, don't forget that France has its own equivalent of Antifa, who began demonstrating against Marine Le Pen before the results are even in. And over the last 2 weeks, they have been really out of order. This was actually a very gentle demonstration yesterday, and they appear to be students, but cars have been burned, shops have been smashed. The French left get really out of order, and you can see that the French gendarmerie are no pussies and actually quite happy to go in with their batons. So apart from the political arguments, which as I said before are immigration and Euroscepticism and the whole cultural argument, if there's a lot of violence in France, and I certainly don't hope for it, but another terrorist attack, then this will strengthen Marine Le Pen's hand. I personally think that the difference of 62% to 38% is very difficult to close. And this is not quite like the French presidential elections, because there already has been a proper vote. So we can see that when French voters actually go to the polling booths, they don't necessarily vote for Le Pen. As I said before, she's in with a chance. She has to debate the issues. I think violence from the left or from the immigrant communities could swing things in her favour, but it's going to be difficult. We have an interesting 2 weeks ahead. I'm very pleased that she got through to the next round, and I'm sure I'll be making more videos about the subject. So please leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, because I'll be back tomorrow talking about something interesting. So have a really great day.